So when I typically perform a scalp micropigmentation procedure on someone, I break it into different sessions. So the first session is where we're going to lay the foundation. So we outline and restore the hairline, and we just make sure we're getting all the areas that need to be assessed and addressed, and they feel comfortable just with the infrastructure of the scalp micropigmentation. During the second session, that's where we're going to actually start increasing the density, and then during the third session and possibly fourth session, we'll just work on the color and increasing the intensity to match the rest of the hairs that are on the sides and the back of the scalp. So with each session, it usually lasts between 1.5 to 2.5 hours. The longest session is typically the first session, just because the scalp isn't used to receiving any pigment at that time, so we just kind of have to train it a little bit, and sometimes what I call micro needling to soften up the scalp and get it prepared to actually accept that pigment. If someone ever has any kind of scar that's thicker, scar tissue is is not very receptive to accepting and keeping the pigment in the area, so sometimes you just have to microneedle that area a little bit to soften up that scar tissue so it can accept pigment a little bit better. During my assessment of scalp micropigmentation, I also take in consideration the color of the hair and the color of the skin. Different pigments will look different on different skin colors just because we're depositing ink under the level where those cells make color or melanin. So if you can imagine, if you deposit brown ink under very pale or white skin, you're going to see the true brown color. Whereas if you deposit brown ink under skin that has pigment or melanin and has different shades of brown, it's either going to make that brown darker. If the person has red undertone, it may make that brown a little bit more red. If they have a golden or blue undertone, it may change the color of the brown to look more orange or more purple, respectively. So it's always interesting to make sure that we actually mix the colors to not only make sure we have the correct color to match the rest of the hairs, but also to make sure that it's going to last and remain that color. A lot of times the downfall with pigments is that they'll separate out. So blacks can separate out to look bluish or even greenish later on. Browns can separate out to look more red later on, or even black by themselves. So you really just have to do a lot of mixing so you can counterbalance that change that may occur over the future. I always advocate, if you can, try to protect the scalp as much as possible. Protect it like the rest of your skin. So don't do too much damaging things. You don't want to get any sunburns. You want to protect the scalp from the sun. So wearing hats or even just applying sunscreen to the scalp is efficient. If anyone's wearing longer styles, I just tell them to just part the hair and use the sunscreen spray, and just to treat and protect the area that we actually did the scalp micropigmentation in. And if all goes well and you take care of the scalp, you're looking at between 8 to 10 years of that pigment remaining and staying vibrant.